Hello, and as you may be aware, Warwick Music is celebrating 30 years of publishing. And right at the very start of that journey was my guest today, the co-founder of Warwick Music Publishing all those many moons ago, Jeremy Dibb. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Adam. Good to speak and good to see you.
Thanks. So, Jeremy, it's great to catch up, and I know that you've had a long and illustrious career in music and music education. But let's go back, if you will, to the early 90s. And if you could tell me a little bit about how you and Simon Hogg helped to start the Warwick music story with, I believe, a previously undiscovered piece of music found in the British Library.
That's absolutely right, and it is lovely. I've got lovely memories, and I'm hoping they're accurate memories because I knew of Simon. I was slightly in awe of him, of course, because he was a great trombonist and founder member of the Fine Arts Brass Ensemble, and we both lived in Warwick, but we hadn't really had that much to do with each other. And I remember that I did approach him because I'd written a brass quintet and I wanted his opinion. And he came round, and for whatever reason, all the equipment was in my bedroom. So we sat there listening to this brass quintet, and we just had a good old natter, as you do when you've got two brass players talking. And yeah, I think the concept of finding good original music for trombone sort of took off from there, because obviously Simon had a vested interest as a professional trombonist. I never really think of myself as a composer. I love writing music, but it's very much a hobby. But bizarrely, I've probably written more for trombone choirs than I have for any other genre, because I just find that writing for trombones and the similarity they have to the human voice and just the quality of the sound when they play together is extraordinary. So yeah, I'm rather in love with the sound of trombones in ensemble, and it came from there. And it was absolutely Simon who had discovered this piece of Gustav Holst, which is very, very exciting. So that was sort of our first enterprise. And then he knew Mark Nightingale, who I know is still, as far as I can tell, still writing regularly.
Yeah,
An amazing player. And we kind of capped off the start of Warwick Music by going over to Minneapolis for one of the international trombone conventions, which was just fabulous. And then I'm fairly sure the next date I went over to Las Vegas in 1995. And I was treated like royalty, which was hilarious, but because they were performing this piece of Holst as part of the convention, which was just great. And yeah, so that was really good fun, and that's how it all started. And it was absolutely a hobby, and my teaching job just sort of got in the way after a bit, and I stepped down, and Simon kept going, and that's when he teamed up with Steve Greenhall, and everybody else knows the story. Warwick Music is a fantastic organization now, but yeah, that's where it started. Me and Simon in my bedroom.
as all the good music stories tend to start. That's fabulous. And yeah, in terms of that story, obviously I'm fairly late to it. I
Yeah.
joined Warwick Music around 18 months ago. But do tell me if you can a little bit about the young Stephen Greenall, my current employer. What are your memories of him back then?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, you just knew right from the start that he knew what he was talking about. I think I'm right in saying that his dad is or was a businessman, and I do seem to remember him being influenced by his dad, but he clearly knew what to do with this, this concept, this publishing house, and he's shown that over the years, hasn't he? Yeah, I mean, just a lovely guy, good guy to work with, but yeah, good, very focused.
That's a good answer for my job security as well. So
Absolutely.
appreciate that, Jeremy. And during those early years, obviously, you've mentioned some of the pieces, and obviously that previously undiscovered Holst piece that started things off. But are there any other pieces that really stand out, or any other composers that you were really particularly thrilled to work with beyond the ones that you've already mentioned?
Well, this is a bit naughty because the honest answer is no, except that Warwick Music published my bestseller, which is an octet called Provence. And I still get occasionally trombone directors, saying, "Oh, we love your piece," and I think it's probably the only one that's regularly performed. But hey, if you've got one piece that's regularly performed, that's not bad, is it?
It's not bad at all. Yeah, I was actually going to ask about the pieces that you yourself have still on the Warwick Music website. There's plenty of them. There's worked for trombone ensemble, which you mentioned,
Yeah.
trumpet ensemble as well. Any others that you'd like to shine a little bit of light on as we look back over 30 years of publishing?
You mean my works or
Yeah,
generally?
yeah. Of your work,
Oh, well,
absolutely.
that's very kind of you. I mean, because I'm being in music education, I've written inevitably a lot for young players. So I suppose other than, the trombone octets, I suppose I'm quietly pleased with what I've written, for young players, because obviously if you don't have young players, you don't have anything, do you? So, and yeah, I'm very flattered that they're still in the catalogue at Warwick Music. And obviously I should mention, because why shouldn't I, Warwick Music in their wisdom have just decided to publish a whole load of new stuff by me, which is very nice.
That's great, yeah, and yeah, a nice story. Obviously, as we celebrate this 30 years, did you imagine way back when that 30 years on, 3 decades later, that people would still be performing some of those original pieces when you started off in your bedroom?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, good question. And as I say, the composing, I don't know why do people compose? It's wonderful that they do, but you just have this stuff inside you, and you want to get it out. And but then it's just an added bonus if people actually want to play it and listen to it. For me, composing is about me expressing myself, and that's the pleasure of it.
Absolutely. You mentioned education there in terms of a lot of the work that you published, and it's obviously been a big part of your working life. You worked for Warwickshire Music Service for a
Yeah.
number of years. You're a director as well.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your work in the education field. It'd be really interesting to hear your insight on that.
Oh, okay. Well, it's very short because I worked for Warwickshire Music Service for 23 years. But it's fair to say within that 23 years, I did every sort of job there was. I actually went in as county choral organizer because the chap who employed me, a lovely chap, good friend called Gary Jones, he had the wisdom to realise that actually if you get kids singing, it's the perfect foundation for whatever else they do in music. But that's always been quite a struggle. I mean, even when I was director, we had 100 teachers, 95 of whom taught instruments, 5 of whom taught singing, which is curious, but actually that's probably correct for all, county music organizations across the country. So, which is why now I've retired supposedly from the county music, I'm now running singing projects, because that, I guess, is my passion. I'm not a trained singer as such, but from an educational point of view, singing is the basis for musical education without any question at all, and so much easier to pick up an instrument if you've been singing as a child for 2 or 3 years and singing regularly and singing in class. So you've got ensemble training, you're developing your oral ability. You can introduce notation and concepts of notation into a singing lesson without any problem at all. And then you've got the raw material to then introduce an instrument and so your child take off. All too often, I think we fall into the trap of giving a child an instrument and putting a piece of music in front of them, and they've had no consistent musical education, and then hoping that they just pick it up. And of course, some of them do, but far too many don't, which is a shame. So yeah, singing is the foundation of musical development for me.
Absolutely, yeah, and I know you've created some resources around singing, haven't you? Is it get the singing habit?
Oh, you've been researching, you're
Oh,
saying? Yeah.
I've done my side of it. Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit about those resources because
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose within Get the Singing Habit, it's very much aimed at the teacher, because as anybody involved in music education knows, the amount of training in delivery of music from the primary school teacher, well, it's virtually zero. So you're actually, asking teachers to deliver a subject they have no knowledge of and are fearful of. And that's a major problem. So the concept of get the singing habit was to put in the simplest possible terms, how you teach a child and what areas and what language you use. I mean, I'll give you a good, for instance, if you're trying to develop pulse and rhythm, which is fairly essential, there are all sorts of ways of doing it, and people use all sorts of silly words and mnemonics. And when I went in, there were colleagues who were using tea, coffee, Coca-Cola, which is a very standard. I preferred slugs, spiders, and caterpillars because it makes children laugh. But, that's I think is a good example of silly ways, attractive ways, memorable ways to deliver music that class teachers first of all understood, that they didn't feel intimidated by, and that they felt they could generate a lesson. I mean, the intention always was that the class teacher would receive a certain amount of training, so they'd see somebody in action and then be asked to simply imitate what they were seeing. And that's the principle really of where I am now with the singing projects that I'm running.
That's led me very nicely onto those current projects. So I know one of them, and again we're sticking well within that Warwick theme. You're working with a company called Warwick, a singing town. Tell us a little bit about that project. It'd be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's great to be involved in it, and it is quite unique because it's more than a schools-based singing project. It's very much a community project. It's based in Warwick quite simply because we have a remarkable amount of support and funding from a local charity, the King Henry VIII Endowed Trust, who have, put a lot of money into this. I mean, basically, there are 4 of us within the team. We're all part-time, but it's the equivalent of 2 full-time singing specialists going into around a dozen schools in Warwick, which means that we can offer every school a regular weekly visit free of charge and work with as many children within those schools as we can. So we're singing every week with at least 1,600 children on a regular basis. But we have 2 other strands. So education is one strand. The second strand is community. Warwick, to be fair, is fairly rich in community choirs. So we're not about setting up choirs in competition. We're about supporting choirs that are already there. So every summer, all these choirs put on their own summer concerts. And, with the greatest respect, you can end up with a concert where you have more in the choir than you do in the audience. So we help out, we produce a brochure, and we simply create a nice, smart, glossy brochure full of all the concerts over the summer, and we call it the Warwick Choral Festival. But what it means is that free of charge, all those choirs get a bit of extra advertising, and we hope to make it a bit of a special occasion, and the Warwick Town Council support it. So that's one example of what we do. We're certainly about finding, events, partnership events where we can bring local choirs onto stages and perhaps put them in front of people who wouldn't normally go to a choir concert. That's a big part of what we do. The third strand is arguably the one I find the most exciting, because the health benefits of singing are really starting to be well recognized. And if anything positive came out of COVID, it's the fact that singing and breath control is an important part of dealing with long COVID. And from that, the physical benefits, the mental health benefits, the emotional health benefits of singing are really starting to come to the fore, and people are starting to realize that singing has all these benefits across the board. So we run singing workshops on a regular basis. So we do run one regular group, weekly group, but that is very much aimed at people who find singing benefits their health. So the health side of what we do is fantastic. We're starting to develop what schools call well-being choirs, which is for children who benefit in terms of their emotional well-being from singing together, often in addition to the school choir. They are starting to go into the local hospital, they're going into care homes. So it's all about getting singing out into the community.
That's fantastic, yeah. And it's worth saying as well, obviously, if anyone listening to this or watching this is interested, warwicksingingtown.co.uk is a place to go to find out more about that project. Obviously, going back to your background in education, we're in quite an interesting landscape in England at the moment with music services. And I know as a former music service director, it would be remiss of me not to ask you about that current situation. How do
Yeah.
you see it? Are you enjoying being on the sidelines and a little distance from it, perhaps?
I'm enjoying being a little distance from it because I do feel for my colleagues because it's always frustrating. I tend to get on my soapbox at this point, so I'll just give you one fact. In 2019, there was an all-parliamentary report on the state of music education in England. So this is now 5 years ago. The opening statement in the conclusion was that music education in England is in crisis. That was 5 years ago. So the only question is, what has changed in 5 years? So it's the big challenge. My hat's off to my colleagues in music services because they are trying to do a very challenging job. COVID really didn't help because the evidence is quite clear now that, you know, when parents and children get into the habit of not going out and joining any sort of activity, let alone just a musical activity, it's quite hard to then get them back into the habit of doing that. So I know that it's really challenging to run choirs and run ensembles for young people. What's encouraging is that at the adult level, joining, you know, your local community choir seems to be on the up. So that's good. But yeah, it's always going to be a challenge, I think, to get young people out into local music groups. So that's where we are. The music education in schools is just so hit and miss, isn't it? You get pockets of fantastic work that's going on. All too often because the principal or the head decide that music is really what they want to do. There are other wonderful singing projects going on across the country. Where you get, you know, consortiums of schools or, you know, academies of schools. That's very encouraging, but it's not consistent. That's what's lacking. There's no consistency, and it comes back to the expectations on schools inevitably. And you know, there will always be this ongoing argument. If you have core subjects and you have the other subjects, schools inevitably have to concentrate on the core subjects. And I can't see anything changing until that changes.
No, of course not. Although hopefully, as you mentioned, projects like A Singing Town do add something to their community, albeit, as you say, maybe some of that's more with adults as opposed to children in this case.
Yeah. I
But
hope so. If I could add one thing, if you don't
please.
mind, because we're supported, and this actually is something we need to think about for the future, because we work only in state schools, but we are supported by the local independent school, by Warwick Schools Foundation. So we're based there. They do well, they're just fantastic. If we do events, they give us all the venues free of charge, and they sort of are the conduit with this local charity who give us all this funding. So they are very, very supportive, and we have to learn from independent schools and the way they promote both the arts and sport, because these things are so healthy for our young people. And, you know, without getting into all the argument about, well, they've got lots of money, haven't they? There is a principle there, isn't there, that a child needs a rounded education. But what I wanted to mention particularly is that they run a big education conference in July in Warwick, and it will feature Warwick, a Singing Town. And we've got some really great speakers coming along. We've got our Professor Graham Welsh, who is the go-to person in terms of research into the benefits of singing. We got Rebecca Ledyard from Ex Cathedra, who leads on their singing playgrounds. And we got Anne Wright from Voces 8. So we've got some really good speakers coming along. And so if you're interested in singing, and particularly singing for children and young people and benefits on well-being, perhaps that's a conference you might be interested in checking out.
That sounds great. You've done my plugs for me. That's fantastic. I was going to ask, are there any other projects that you're aware of? Anything else you'd like to speak about?
I suppose only that, as you mentioned before, wouldn't it be lovely if Warwick, a Singing Town, was the first singing town and not the only singing town? So at the moment, I'm spending a day a week in Bedworth, or as locals tend to say it, Bedworth, which is a different demographic from Warwick. I'm having the nicest time at the moment. I'm going into as many schools as I can in the area just to introduce the concept of a singing town. I'm getting funding by, again, another local charity, the Nicholas Chamberlain Trust, who are just brilliant. Early days, but it's all about just spreading the word about the benefits of singing across the community, but starting in schools.
That's fantastic. And finally, as we've taken this little walk down memory lane, any final thoughts on 30 years of Warwick Music Publishing?
Oh, well, it's just a buzz. And Simon and I do meet up quite regularly. And yeah, it's just great to think that something we started. Actually, it all happened in Simon's top bedroom that got converted into the music room. And, you know, we sat there on the floor together, binding all these books up, you know, and sending them out by hand. And as I say, a couple of trips over to the trombone convention, but to see where it's got to now, yeah, I mean, that's great. And hats off to you and all your colleagues who've made it happen. But yeah, it's quite nice to think I was there at the start. That's good fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thanks, Adam. Pleasure.
And for more information on Jeremy's work, including links to resources like Get the Singing Habit, head to jeremydibbmusic.wordpress.com. And if you'd like to check out Jeremy's published brass pieces, they're available where it all started, not bound by hand in a bedroom, but at warwickmusic.com, where you can download PDF versions of all of those pieces. Thanks so much, Jeremy, and here's to another 30 years and more of music making. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.